He grumbled about cheese, then dropped dead before dessert. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Say hi in the comments. Let me know where you're joining from tonight. It's always a joy hearing from this amazing community. You could say a lot of things about Nero Wolfe, but flexible was never going to be one of them. The man was a monument. You could have carved him out of granite, planted him in that oversized chair in his office, and generations would have come to see it like a shrine. Here sat a man who refused to move for anything short of treason. And even then, only if it interrupted dinner. It was a Wednesday, which meant veal shank with black truffle risotto, unless Fritz was experimenting, which he rarely did without a signed treaty from Wolfe. I was 2/3 through sorting the week's expense reports, and 1/3 through a daydream about a redhead I met in Midtown, when the doorbell rang. Wolfe didn't flinch. I waited. The bell rang again. "Archie," he said, with that sigh of a man being asked to observe his own breathing. "If the visitor has rung twice, they will ring a third time. You may prevent it." I swung the door open on what I expected to be a delivery boy or a lost insurance salesman. What I got was a man in a 3-piece gray worsted suit with a face that had been carefully shaved and a mustache that hadn't. His expression was somewhere between irritated and existentially wounded. "Yes?" I asked, trying not to block his full view of the rug. People like this always look at the rug. It's instinct. "I must speak with Mr. Nero Wolfe," he said. "I am being conspired against by a cheesemonger." I gave him one Mississippi to let the joke land. He wasn't joking. "You don't say. Care to step inside and ruin our afternoon?" He did, with the kind of careful precision that told me 2 things right away. 1, this guy didn't normally barge into places without a reservation, and 2, he was desperate enough to do it anyway. I led him to the office, where Wolfe sat in his throne with the kind of regal stillness that made you feel like you were interrupting a papal audience. He barely turned his head as I announced, "Mr. Baxter," the man said, already approaching the desk. "Prescott Baxter." I tilted an invisible hat. "Mr. Prescott Baxter, connoisseur of cheese-related crime." Wolfe blinked. That's the Wolfe equivalent of dropping a monocle. Mr. Baxter seated himself without being asked. A bold move in our world. He reached into his briefcase and produced a wrapped wheel of cheese, the color of old parchment and twice as suspicious. "I ordered this," he said, placing it on Wolfe's desk, with the same grim finality someone might use to hand over a ransom note. "It's an aged Reblochon from a particular farm in Haute-Savoie. Or it should be." Wolfe stared at the cheese as if it had uttered a slur. "You intend to use my time," he said slowly, "to examine the provenance of French dairy." Baxter's face reddened. "I'm not mad. This cheese is part of a fraud, a substitution, and someone is profiting." Wolfe leaned back. That alone was a victory. "Explain." "I'm a member of the Ring Society, a private collective of gastronomes. We host monthly tastings. Blind, rigorous. Last Friday, I brought this. It won the evening by unanimous acclaim. That's the problem." He reached into his inner jacket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, flipping it open with a flourish. "Reblochon OOC must come from unpasteurized cow's milk, aged in cellars with very specific humidity conditions. I know the producer. I've sourced from them for years, and I assure you, this is not their cheese." "I take it you expressed this concern," Wolfe murmured. "I did. At our follow-up tasting Sunday, I voiced my suspicions, politely, firmly. I was told in not so many words that I was imagining things, that I was jealous of the praise." And then he paused, his voice tightening. "I received an anonymous message. A note slipped under my apartment door." He handed it to me. Plain stationery, typewritten. "You taste too much. Keep your mouth shut, or it will stay that way." I whistled low. Wolfe finally looked directly at Baxter. "Sir, do you sincerely expect me to involve myself in a matter of swapped cheese and sour tempers among gourmet hobbyists?" "I expect," Baxter said, and now the desperation was replaced with something sharper. that you're too intelligent to dismiss something just because it sounds absurd. Someone is using our society, its tastings and supply chains for personal gain, possibly worse. I've documented purchases made under false accounts. I believe shipments are being diverted. I believe someone's making a fortune while using my palette to validate their fraud. He rose, and now I'm being warned to stop looking. So yes, Mr. Wolfe, I believe something criminal is happening. I believe it's disguised as culture, and I believe you're the only one smart enough and immobile enough to solve it. He dropped an envelope on the desk. Thick cash. I didn't count it, but it had the satisfying thud of sincerity. Wolfe pursed his lips. Leave the cheese. Mr. Baxter nodded once and left without another word. The door shut behind him. I gave Wolfe a look. You're not really going to take a case about sabotaged camembert, are you? It's reblock on, Wolfe corrected, already reaching for the bell to summon Fritz. And yes, I find myself piqued. He glanced toward the cheese on the desk, as if it had committed a subtle insult. Someone is trading on trust, misusing taste. There is vanity here, deceit, perhaps even commerce. I will not have it. And just like that, the brownstone had been disturbed. Fritz came in 3 minutes later, summoned by Wolfe's bell, with the slightly defensive air of a man who knew he'd be asked to defend the sanctity of his kitchen. When he saw the cheese on Wolfe's desk, his eyebrows lifted in quiet protest. I did not place that there, he said to me, as if needing an alibi. Relax, I told him. It's not yours, and it's not staying. Wolfe's got a new client. Fritz's eyes narrowed at the mention. He glanced at the reblochon again, this time with professional scrutiny. That is not proper, he murmured. It's wrong. Soft where it should be firmer. And the rind is... Fritz, Wolfe cut in. Bring a tray with knives. I intend to taste it. Fritz looked positively scandalized, but left without another word. Wolfe turned his eyes to the cheese as if preparing to interrogate it. You're serious about this, I said. Yes, a fraud that seeks validation through expertise while threatening the very instrument of that validation is more than cheese, Archie. It's betrayal, a betrayal that presumes sophistication will blind suspicion. Wouldn't be the first time someone used gourmet snobbery as camouflage, I said. Though I have to admit, this is the first case we've had that started with a dairy product. Wolfe's lip curled. Food is not mere nourishment. It is language, substituting inferior goods while claiming the prestige of excellence is a lie with wide margins. One does not counterfeit a flavor without counterfeiting trust. I didn't say it, but I was beginning to get the picture. This wasn't about cheese. It was about someone using Wolfe's sacred world taste, precision, indulgence, as a weapon. And he took that personally. Fritz returned with the tray. Wolfe did the cutting himself, slow and deliberate, placing a wedge of the reblochon onto a small white dish. He tasted it, just a morsel pressed delicately to his tongue. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the verdict had already formed. It is not the original, he said. The milk has been pasteurized. The salt balance is off. The finish is abrupt, like a poorly written sonnet. He put the plate down and looked at me. You will begin, Archie. First, Mr. Prescott Baxter. Discover what you can about his life, particularly his circle of acquaintances in this Rhine society. Then inquire discreetly into the members. I want names, occupations, any financial or social connections, and locate the supplier he claims to use. You're assuming Baxter's telling the truth. I am assuming, Wolfe said, that a man does not risk ridicule and commit cash in order to publicize his own poor taste. At least, not one like Baxter. Fair. I got my coat and hat. You want Saul? Not yet. I left Wolfe with the cheese and Fritz with his dignity and headed out into the humid grip of a June afternoon. Prescott Baxter lived in a sleek tower on East 74th, the kind of place where the doorman looks like he knows your secrets, but would never tell. I gave him Wolfe's card and got a raised eyebrow and a request to wait. Baxter came down himself. I assumed you'd be following up, he said. ushering me into the elevator without waiting for permission. But I didn't expect it so quickly. "That's Wolfe for you," I said. "He doesn't move, but he doesn't wait either. Now, let's talk cheese." His apartment was a cathedral to modern design. Minimalist furniture, expensive lighting, a single temperature-controlled wine fridge that probably cost more than my car. He gestured toward the sofa. "The society meets twice a month, always at the same place. Le Bernardin's private room, intimate tastings. Very select. The members are vetted. And the guest list?" He handed me a folded card, heavy stock, embossed, an invitation to the most recent tasting. There were 9 of us, not counting staff. I scanned the names. Some I'd heard before. Arlo Winthrop, society columnist. Lucinda Dearborn, restaurateur. Malcolm Trent, tech money. Currently trying to reinvent butter. I assume you've had differences of opinion with a few of them. Baxter made a sound that might have been a laugh or indigestion. Lucinda thinks everything should be organic and locally sourced. Malcolm thinks a tasting isn't valid unless it's been documented on 3 platforms. And Winthrop, well, he has a way of stirring conflict. Did you accuse any of them directly of the switch? I said what I suspected. I didn't name names, but someone didn't appreciate even that. He nodded toward the note, still sitting on his coffee table like a guest. Nobody wanted to claim, and you have no idea who could have sent it. I have 4 ideas, he said, dryly, but no proof. Let's go with ideas. Who's your top pick? Lucinda, he said without hesitation. She's been trying to take over curation of the tastings for months, always hinting that my palate's become too classical. She could have done the switch to embarrass me. Embarrassment doesn't usually come with a death threat. Neither does cheese, he replied. I took down the addresses of the other members, thanked him for the coffee I didn't drink, and made my way through the list. Over the next 5 hours I spoke with 4 members, left notes for 2 others, and got stiff-armed by 1 personal assistant with a spray tan and a schedule that could kill a lesser man. The ones I did talk to were all smiles and denial. Yes, they remembered the cheese. Yes, it had been wonderful. No, they hadn't noticed anything wrong. And no, they hadn't seen Baxter act out of sorts, at least not more than usual. But 2 things stood out. 1, everyone remembered how effusive Winthrop had been. He'd praised the reblochon like it was a lost masterpiece. A few had even joked that he might try to buy the whole wheel. And 2, no one had seen the actual wrapping or box it came in. Baxter had brought it already cut and plated, which meant if a switch had been made, it could have happened before the tasting. Or that Baxter was the one doing the switching himself. I brought that thought back to Wolfe just before 9. He was in the office, still seated, still digesting both food and facts. The cheese was gone. He listened to the full rundown and nodded once. Did you taste it, Archie? I didn't have the opportunity. Pity. You might have noted the subtle infidelity in its aroma. It claimed to be one thing and failed to deliver. Much like our suspect. So, what's next? The guest list is as he described. Yes, but there's no love lost between any of them. It's all sharp smiles and silent snubs. Then begin with Winthrop. Anyone who praises counterfeit too loudly often knows its origin. And if he denies it, he will, but he will lie poorly. Vanity is not adept at concealment. He closed his eyes for a moment. Tomorrow, we begin pulling threads. Tonight, Fritz will prepare the genuine article. I have contacted our own supplier. We shall remind ourselves what honesty tastes like. I nodded and turned to leave. Oh, Archie, Wolfe added, eyes still closed. Have Fritz discard the rest of the counterfeit. It offends me. Understood. As I went to handle the offending wheel, I thought about the look in Baxter's eyes. Desperation. Yes, but also something else. A man used to being trusted, suddenly unsure of what had turned on him. In a world built on taste, betrayal didn't always smell like gunpowder. Sometimes it smelled like cheese. and someone was already sweating. The next morning I had two goals: pay a social call on Arla Winthrop, and figure out if anyone in the Rhine Society had been playing a longer game than cheese swapping. Wolfe, naturally, hadn't budged an inch since last night, except perhaps to glare once at the cheese knife Fritz forgot to realign on the serving tray. Winthrop lived in a townhouse in Chelsea, the kind of place that announces old money through antique doorknobs and the faint smell of self-importance. He was dressed in a lavender robe and white suede slippers when he answered the door, looking like he'd just been interrupted from contemplating his own greatness. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, smoothing back hair that had no interest in obeying him. "I rather expected you." "People usually do," I said. "I'm the bad news wrapped in a better tie. Mind if I come in?" He stepped aside, all false charm and calculated nonchalance. The living room was decorated in glossy minimalism, black lacquer, chrome, and just enough eccentric sculpture to seem cultivated. A small glass case housed an array of antique cheese knives, each labeled and underlit like a shrine to dairy violence. "You're here about Baxter, I assume," he said, gesturing toward a low chair that looked like it had never forgiven its designer. "You assume right. He seems to think the cheese at last Friday's tasting wasn't what it claimed to be." Winthrop snorted softly, sinking onto a chaise and lighting a slim cigarette. Prescott's palate has always been a little over-imaginative. He once accused a Parmigiano Reggiano of being Austrian. "Austrian, Mr. Goodwin. So you don't think there was a switch?" "Of course not." The reblochon was exquisite, bold, nuanced, alive. I even tried to buy more of it, though Prescott wouldn't share the supplier. "That's interesting," I said, pulling out my notebook with a little flourish, "because he says the opposite. Claims he's been sourcing from the same place for years, and the sample brought to the tasting wasn't his. In fact, he claims it was pasteurized. Fake." Winthrop gave a light, affected laugh. "Of course he does. It's the classic dodge. When someone else gets the applause, invent sabotage. So you didn't swap it yourself. You didn't swap it yourself. He gave me a hard look. "What possible reason would I have to tamper with cheese, Mr. Goodwin? It's not as though we wager money at these tastings." "No," I said, "but reputations can be worth more than cash. You praise a cheese that turns out to be fake. Either you're in on it, or you're the fall guy." Something flickered in his eyes, just for a second, then it vanished behind a puff of lavender smoke. "Very theatrical," he said. "But you're chasing mice in the dairy." "Possibly. But even mice leave droppings." I left him with that and took a cab downtown. I needed someone with less performance and more pragmatism. Enter Lucinda Dearborn. Lucinda ran Churn, a farm-to-table operation in the West Village that did a brisk brunch business and a smug dinner service. I found her outside, talking to a delivery man with the practiced calm of someone who regularly dealt with food in crisis. She wore black boots, black jeans, and a shirt that said, "Not pasteurized." "Not sorry, Ms. Dearborn?" I asked, showing her Wolfe's card. "Let me guess, Baxter's having a tantrum," she said, folding her arms. "Don't tell me he thinks he was sabotaged again." So this isn't new. Prescott is very attached to his cheese identity. Any challenge to it, and he becomes operatic. You think it's insecurity. I think it's fear of irrelevance. He's built his name on classic French sourcing. But food's moving forward. The new scene doesn't worship reblochon. It experiments with it. Baxter won't adapt, and that's worth a threat under the door. Lucinda's brows shot up. "A threat? Are you serious?" I pulled out a photo of the note. Her lips tightened as she read it. "I had no idea," she said. "That's beyond snobbery. That's intimidation. You ever write anything like that?" Her eyes locked on mine. "I don't threaten people, Mr. Goodwin. I say what I think to their faces. If I wanted Baxter discredited, I'd do it with a blog post, not a whisper campaign. That almost sounds like a confession. It sounds like marketing. There's a difference." I believed her. For now. She didn't strike me as the note-slipping type. She liked fights out in the open. but her resentment toward Baxter was the real deal. And it was starting to feel like this little society of elite cheese tasters was more of a pressure cooker than a dinner club. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was late afternoon. Wolfe was in the plant room with Theodore, which meant I had to wait. I used the time to call Saul Panzer and gave him a quick outline. Run a full background on the Rhine Society, I said. Start with financials. See if anyone's making money off boutique cheese swaps, or whatever the black market version of dairy looks like. Already on it, Saul said. Something's fishy, or rather milky. When Wolfe emerged from his orchids, I filled him in. Winthrop denies all, I said. Blames Baxter's ego. Lucinda confirms the ego, but denies the sabotage. They both had motive to knock Baxter down a peg, but the question is, did they have a reason to do it now? Wolfe nodded. That, Archie, is the key. A motive is not merely a desire. It is a desire aligned with timing. I sat across from him. You want to hear the cherry on top? Only if it's edible. Lucinda said something about the cheese scene evolving. Experimental cheese blends, new imports, market shifts. There's money changing hands behind this snobbery. You think someone's using the society as a front? Wolfe closed his eyes. I think someone is using Baxter's palate as a certification tool. If he declares a fraud to be authentic, it increases its market value, especially in elite circles. So they slipped him a fake. He praised it, and now they're turning a profit. Precisely. But they underestimated him. He caught the fraud. So now, they must silence or discredit him. That note was desperation. But the real clue, Archie, is that wheel of cheese. You think there's more to it than bad bacteria. I think, Wolfe said, tapping a finger on the armrest, that someone switched more than a cheese. They're redirecting product, substandard or illicit, through a network that includes Baxter's society. They needed a stamp of excellence, and they got it. Until he turned. He opened his eyes. Find out who supplied that wheel. The actual supplier, not the name Baxter thinks he used. Someone diverted the order. You will find them. That evening I placed a few calls to boutique distributors and got lucky with a man named Harvey Klein, who ran a tight little import business in Soho. Reblochon, he said. Yeah, we had a few wheels go out to a private buyer last week, through a new sub-account. Guy used a digital transfer, anonymous shell, got the name. It was, hold on, yeah, here, L. Dearborn. I blinked. Lucinda? That's what the account says. I thanked him and hung up. Wolfe was still in his chair when I returned. Well, someone ordered Reblochon under Lucinda's name, anonymously, and routed it to a private buyer, right before the tasting. Wolfe nodded, unsurprised. They are trying to frame her, which means she is not the one profiting. But she is in the way, and Baxter is the bait, unwitting, but sharp enough to feel the hook that makes him dangerous. He tapped the arm of the chair again, a slow rhythm. Tomorrow, he said, we disturb the pond. The fish will rise. And in Wolfe's world, when the fish rose, someone was always netted. The next morning broke with a clear sky and an ambiguous mood. Wolfe was in his chair at precisely 9:11 a.m., already scowling at the unopened envelope from La Société Fromagère Internationale that had arrived with the post. I was halfway through a second cup of coffee, which by house standards made me a delinquent. You're quiet this morning, I said, taking the envelope and flipping it open with a finger. He didn't look up. Because I am thinking. You sure? Because it kind of looks like you're sulking. I am not sulking, he said, eyes still closed. I am maneuvering. That was Wolfe's way of saying he'd made a move in his head and was waiting for the board to respond. I glanced at the enclosed flyer, a cheese symposium schedule and tasting guide, and filed it under probably irrelevant until it isn't. You've got a plan, then? I do. We are going to let the saboteur make a mistake. And for that, we must set a table. That a metaphor or a literal request? I will speak to Fritz, he said, eyes still closed. I left him to his orchestration and headed down to the kitchen, where Fritz was polishing silver with the intensity of a man polishing his own honor. Wolfe wants a table set, I said, for cheese. And I'm guessing for war. Fritz gave me a sidelong look. He wants to serve the real Reblochon, real, unreplaced, and preferably triumphant. He wants to make a point. Then I shall prepare a tasting that no one will forget. I didn't doubt it. When Fritz set out to make a point, it came on a plate that practically filed a restraining order against mediocrity. By midday, I was back on the trail. My first stop was the boutique importer, Harvey Klein, whose tip had cracked the door open. His warehouse on Wooster Street was stacked high with soft-rind ambition and vacuum-sealed duplicity. Harvey looked like a man who'd never met a cardigan. He didn't love. I told you everything I knew yesterday, he said, peering over a clipboard. I'm not here for more names, I said. I'm here for shipping. Where'd that fake Reblochon go before it reached Baxter? He frowned. It wasn't supposed to go to Baxter. That order was marked for a holding partner. We got an address in Yonkers. It was picked up and signed for. Same day it was delivered. You got a name? He nodded and checked the invoice log. Harlan Bixby. Now there was a name I hadn't heard yet. Back at the brownstone I fed Wolfe the details. Standing as I spoke, he always listened better when you didn't sit without permission. Harlan Bixby is a freelance broker, I said. He arranges bulk orders for elite restaurants, private clubs, high-end caterers. No storefront, no accountability. The cheese got routed to him. Then somehow it ends up on Baxter's plate at the tasting. Did you speak to Mr. Bixby? I left him a message through his service line. He's not exactly eager to chat. But I've got Saul following up. Wolfe grunted. They are building layers. Yeah, they framed Lucinda with the account. They baited Baxter with the cheese. Bixby's the conduit. The invisible hand. He is more than that, Archie, Wolfe said. He is the leak in the pipe. And we must find what flows through it. That night Fritz performed an operatic rendition of a cheese course. Reblochon Morbier, Epoisses, and a gleaming wedge of Comté that made Wolfe sigh with something approaching joy. The genuine Reblochon, provided through Wolfe's own supplier, was the centerpiece. As expected, it was revelatory. Note the rind, Wolfe said, dabbing his lips. The velvety elasticity, the nose of ammonia is present but subtle, real, not manufactured. He gestured for me to taste. I did. It was good. It was better than good. But I had a mouth that was better with beer than bacteria, so I took his word on the subtleties. We will invite them, Wolfe said. Who? Exactly. Baxter, Winthrop, Lucinda, and Mr. Bixby. I blinked. You expect him to come? He will, because he believes we don't know he exists, and because he has not yet seen the wheel turn. I called Saul that night. You get anything on Bixby? He's clean in all the ways that matter. No priors, no lawsuits, no debt, but he's got a pattern. He always works around authenticity. Never with it. He handles last-minute orders for limited batch products, moves them through informal network. Word is he's made a fortune finding close enough replacements for high-end clients too busy or lazy to tell the difference. So he sells fake fancy to rich people who wouldn't know a genuine truffle from a button mushroom. Basically, that fit perfectly. Bixby was the profit engine. He knew how to move goods that looked right but weren't. He had access, plausible deniability, and zero loyalty to anything except margin. Wolfe was waiting. When I got off the phone, tomorrow, he said, we host. You will call them. Invite them to a tasting. I raised a brow. Won't that seem suspicious? He closed his eyes, a little smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. Of course, that is the point. Suspicion will bring defensiveness. Defensiveness will bring contradiction, and contradiction will bring truth. The next morning was all orchestration. Fritz polished glasses like they were making their Broadway debut. Wolfe dictated precise seating. Baxter at 12 o'clock, Winthrop at 3, Lucinda at 6, and Bixby at 9. I was to hover like a waiter with a badge, eyes open, voice ready. We told them it was a comparative tasting hosted by Wolfe himself. An honor, a curiosity, a lure. Baxter arrived first. Nervous, but interested. Winthrop wore a new ascot and a smile that looked spray-painted on. Lucinda came in like she'd been dared, and Bixby came late, with sunglasses and a practiced smile that didn't quite fit his eyes. "Mr. Bixby," Wolfe said from his chair, "thank you for accepting. I imagine this is not your usual sort of soiree." Bixby laughed. "I couldn't say no to a Nero Wolfe invitation." "No," Wolfe said, "you couldn't." The table was set. Fritz entered with the cheese. "This," Wolfe said, "is genuine reblochon. From the very supplier Mr. Baxter has used for years." He gestured. They tasted. Compliments were offered. Bixby stayed quiet, evaluating. "And this," Wolfe continued, "was the wheel delivered to Mr. Baxter's home last week. The one that won your society's acclaim. More slices, more chewing." Then silence. Subtle difference. Bixby said. "Non-committal." "No," Wolfe said, "not subtle. Fraudulent." He leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Bixby, you routed this wheel to Baxter under the name of Lucinda Dearborn, did you not?" Bixby's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I what?" "I have the invoice," Wolfe said, "and the importer's statement. You acted as middleman." Lucinda sat upright. "You used my name." "I didn't," Bixby began. "You were paid," Wolfe said, "to substitute an inferior wheel. One close enough to deceive, if praised by the right man. And Baxter's praise, given in ignorance, became a seal of value." Baxter stared at him. "You set me up?" Bixby turned defensive. "I was just moving product. That's all I do. I don't handle notes or threats." "No," Wolfe said calmly, "but someone else does. Someone who knew Baxter would notice. Who wanted him silenced, or at least disgraced. Someone who wanted Lucinda's name tainted in the process." Wolfe paused. "Mr. Winthrop." Winthrop froze. "You praised the cheese, repeatedly, loudly. But you never touched the wheel before the tasting. How did you know it was Baxter's finest?" Winthrop opened his mouth. "Because you helped route it," Wolfe finished. "You and Bixby. You've been selling quietly faked products into elite hands, laundering inferior imports as luxury stock, and using Baxter's reputation to raise their market value." Winthrop stood. "You can't prove." "I can," Wolfe said. "The paper trail, the buyer accounts, and your texts to Bixby, which Saul Panzer retrieved an hour ago." Winthrop's mouth snapped shut. Wolfe sighed. "Taste is trust. You abused both." No one spoke. "Archie, the police." "Gladly," I said, and as I made the call I caught Baxter's face, something between relief and humiliation, and knew Wolfe was right. In a world that values subtlety, the worst crimes often come disguised as refinement. Winthrop didn't resist. He didn't protest. He didn't even reach for his ridiculous ascot as I escorted him to the door and into the waiting arms of Manhattan's least sentimental plainclothes. The guy had the look of someone who'd lost the thread of a performance and wasn't sure if the curtain had fallen or if the audience had walked out. Bixby, on the other hand, went pale and asked for a lawyer 3 times before I'd even finished giving his name. Lucinda remained seated at the table like a general who'd just realized she wasn't the one directing the battle. Baxter, for his part, had gone quiet and was staring down at his hands that had unknowingly lent credibility to a counterfeit, and which were now trembling with the weight of that knowledge. After the door closed behind the last officer, Wolfe didn't move. He let silence settle in the room like a second helping. Then he finally turned his eyes toward Baxter. "Your palate," he said, "has not failed you. Your trust has." Baxter nodded stiffly, like the verdict had been spoken from a pulpit. "I should have known," he said. Winthrop's praise. He was never that effusive, not unless he was selling something. Wolfe grunted. He was, and he sold it with your approval. I cleared away the plates while Baxter thanked Wolfe, in clipped tones, apologizing once more for the disturbance. Lucinda stayed behind, arms crossed, staring at the space Bixby had occupied. "Why use my name?" she said finally. "Because you're inconvenient," Wolfe said. A modernist. A threat to an old god built on exclusivity. He hoped the taint of substitution would stick to you, undermining your credibility and reducing your influence. You are not meant to be framed as a criminal, just a careless woman. Lucinda's expression hardened. If they'd succeeded, I'd have lost clients, my reputation. Yes, Wolfe said. That was the idea. That was the idea. She stood. You've got my gratitude, Mr. Wolfe. And if you ever need a new supplier, one that doesn't launder cheese, I'll make introductions. He gave her a curt nod, which, from him, was the equivalent of a slow clap. When the door finally closed behind her, I looked over at Wolfe. He hadn't moved from his chair in hours, but he looked like he'd just crossed a finish line no one else could see. "You want the wrap-up?" I asked. "Spare me the dramatics, just the sequence." I leaned against the edge of the desk. Winthrop and Bixby were running a side hustle, importing inferior, unauthorized cheeses, laundering them through private buyers who wanted the prestige but didn't care about the fine print. Baxter's Rhine Society tastings gave them the perfect publicity. One compliment from him, and the product became gospel. Wolfe nodded, eyes half closed. But Baxter caught the switch. He didn't taste what he expected, started poking around. That made him a liability. So they cooked up a scheme, order a near copy through Bixby, forge the purchase using Lucinda's name to misdirect suspicion, and let Baxter's credibility suffer when the truth came out. The note under his door was insurance, a way to scare him off. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. Though the note was a miscalculation, desperation breeds carelessness. I took a seat. I gotta say, this was subtle even by your standards. No body, no blood, just reputations rigged like poker chips. Precisely, Wolfe said. A crime of perception. No theft, yet value was stolen. No violence, yet trust was assaulted. The public world of food is a stage, Archie, and someone tried to rewrite the script. He fell into one of his silent pauses, the kind that usually end in either philosophy or digestion. You think this kind of thing happens a lot? In its way. Yes. Though not always with cheese. I leaned forward. You think Baxter'll recover? Wolfe gave me a look. He will if he learns. Otherwise he'll simply become more paranoid. That sounded about right. I stepped into the kitchen to give Fritz the go-ahead to serve dinner. He was relieved. The tasting had interfered with his timing, and Fritz's feelings about disrupted courses are about as mild as his feelings about margarine. By the time I got back, Wolfe was reading a book of epigrams from the Ottoman court, and I figured the moment for postmortems had passed. Over dinner, braised duck with lavender honey, courtesy of a Fritz, clearly out to cleanse his palate. We talked of nothing but sauces, basil varietals, and whether the French or Italians had the better claim on tarragon. I let it drift. Wolfe's version of celebration is indistinguishable from his normal life, except he eats slightly faster. After dessert, I lit a cigar and leaned back. You know, I said, the whole thing could have gone off without a hitch. If Baxter hadn't been so damn particular. Yes, Wolfe said, which is why conmen despise precision. It unravels their artifice. So he saved himself with taste. No, Wolfe replied. He saved himself with memory. Taste alone is too fleeting. But he remembered the truth, and that made the lie visible. He took a sip of beer and let it rest. An adequate metaphor for most things, I think. Deep, I said. But you still hate fake cheese. Wolfe raised a brow. Archie, I despise all fakery. Cheese is merely the current expression. That was Wolfe's version of righteous fury. You couldn't see the flames, but the fire was there. Slow burning, controlled, and likely to roast someone at 325 degrees, until the truth turned golden and undeniable. The phone rang just after 10. I picked it up. Saul's voice came through with that efficient calm of a man who never called unless he had the goods. "I've got the financials. Bixby's been laundering more than cheese. He's got shell companies tied to 4 other importers. Olive oil, chocolate, caviar. The guy's been flavor washing half the luxury food scene. Still want me to pass it to the DA." Wolfe, hearing this, nodded once. "Yeah," I said. "Let's keep the dominoes falling." I hung up and looked over at Wolfe. "So that's it then. Case closed. For us," he said. "Others may take longer to digest." He stood, a rarity, and stepped to the globe to pour himself a brandy. I waited, knowing he had one more line in him, and I was right. "Civilization," Wolfe said, swirling the amber liquid, "is held together by the smallest honest things. A correctly aged cheese, a real olive, a name that means what it claims." He said, "When men betray those, they betray more than taste. They betray trust. And trust, Archie, once curdled, does not easily age well." I raised my glass in silent toast. He sat, and just like that, the brownstone settled again, still, quiet, and safe from impostors. For now. It was 2 days after the cheese debacle settled like a pungent fog into the city's collective culinary conscience, when Inspector Kramer showed up at the brownstone, unannounced and unamused. He wore his usual look of displeasure, but this time it wasn't directed exclusively at Wolfe. No. He spread it around generously. Me, Fritz, the rug in the front hall, the orchid temperature schedule I'd left open on the sideboard. Kramer could find something incriminating in a potted fern. "I suppose you know why I'm here," he said after marching into Wolfe's office, like he owned the place. He sat down without being invited, which I'll say for him, takes a certain kind of gall. Wolfe didn't look up from the book he was reading. Something medieval and dreary, probably. "You are here," he said, "because you lack the patience to wait for the report I instructed Mr. Goodwin to deliver." Kramer grunted. "I've got half the city's artisan food lobby breathing down my neck. You cracked open a cheese ring, Wolfe, and I mean that literally. We've got counterfeit reblochon, phony olive oil, some jerk selling balsamic vinegar that's never been near Medina, and now every restaurateur in Manhattan wants to know if they've been serving sawdust soufflés." I cleared my throat. "If it makes you feel better, Inspector." Wolfe didn't want to take the case. He was seduced by the stench of injustice. Kramer shot me a look. "Don't be clever, Goodwin. Not while I'm still digesting lunch." "Then don't ask questions you already know the answers to," I said, as pleasantly as I could manage. "You want the rundown or not?" Kramer turned back to Wolfe. "I've got Winthrop and Bixby in holding. We're digging through years of shell companies and forged labels. But what I want, what I need, is motive. Why'd a society columnist with an ego problem and a freelance broker decide to fake fine dining? Because," Wolfe said, folding his book shut with finality, "they realized 2 truths. First, that perception can be sold as easily as product. Second, that no one questions luxury, so long as it's wrapped in the right ribbon." Kramer scowled. "That's a philosophy. I need a case." Wolfe finally looked up. Mr. Winthrop, despite his taste and reputation, lacked money. His column was declining in influence, and he had lifestyle expectations to uphold. Mr. Bixby had the supply chain and the cynicism. Together they created a quiet market for look-alike goods sold as rare delicacies. With Baxter's praise, their substitutes became endorsed product, lucrative enough to attract notice. And as with all such schemes, one man noticed too much. Baxter, Kramer said. Of course. He became a liability. Had he remained silent, they would have continued indefinitely. Instead, he challenged the narrative. I chimed in. So they used his own authority to trap him, fed him the fraud, got him to bless it, then tried to discredit him when he sniffed it out. Wolfe nodded. A case of culinary gaslighting. Rare, but not unheard of. Kramer grunted again, louder this time. like he was trying to clear bureaucratic phlegm from his soul. "All right," he said. "You've given me a case, damn it. And I'll have to spend the next 3 months untangling it." He rose, tugging down his lapels. "I'll want a written statement." "You shall have it," Wolfe said, already reaching for another book. Kramer turned to me. "And Goodwin, no more tasting societies. Last time you got involved with rich foodies, the commissioner's wife tried to file an ethics complaint about foie gras entrapment. I only go where Wolfe points me," I said. "And I don't touch foie. It's political." After Kramer left, slamming the door with the kind of finality only civil servants can manage, Wolfe remained silent for a full minute. Then, without looking up, he said, "We are not done." I turned from the window. "Say again." "There is one element unresolved." He gestured with a finger, not quite toward me, not quite away. His way of dismissing all distractions and commanding attention in the same breath. "Why did Baxter never check the packaging?" That stopped me short. "He said he brought it pre-sliced, to keep it from over-ripening." "Yes," Wolfe murmured, "but he never verified it. He accepted that what had been delivered was what he'd ordered. That assumption allowed the substitution." I paced a little. "You think someone close to him made the swap?" "Possibly. Or someone with access." Bixby routed the wheel, but the switch at the tactile level required hands, and hands require opportunity. I paused. "Fritz didn't touch it." "No," Wolfe said, "but we must assume someone did. Mr. Baxter's household staff, a neighbor, a member of the society with access to his home." I frowned. "You think there's a third conspirator?" "Not necessarily in the crime," Wolfe said, "but in the logistics. Find out who was in Baxter's apartment the day the cheese arrived." I made the call. Baxter sounded weary, like someone whose view of friendship had been stirred, chilled, and left to curdle. "Yes," he said. "The wheel was delivered while I was out. My assistant, Melinda, received it." Melinda Crane. She handles everything, my calendar, mail, deliveries. She's been with me 3 years. "And you trust her?" He hesitated. "Implicitly. Or I did." That hesitation was enough. "Mind if I talk to her?" He agreed, reluctantly. She was at the apartment that afternoon. Early 30s, stylish, brisk. Her handshake was dry and firm. Secretarial efficiency, with a hint of gatekeeper's pride. "I'm here to talk about the cheese," I said, watching her expression. It didn't flinch. "Of course, that's all anyone's talked about." "You received the package?" "Yes. It was left in the service foyer, as usual. I placed it in the fridge, unopened." "You didn't inspect it?" "No. Mr. Baxter doesn't like anyone handling his orders." That tracked. But something in her voice was too polished, too prepared. "Mind if I look at the fridge?" She hesitated. "It's been cleaned. He had a professional crew in yesterday. Everything's gone." "How convenient." I returned to the brownstone and relayed the story. Wolfe closed his eyes. "She handled it," he said. "You think she's involved?" "I think she was used. Perhaps without full knowledge, but her role was critical. She made the delivery viable." I frowned. "What now?" "We watch her. Fritz isn't going to like you turning the brownstone into surveillance central. I am not suggesting espionage, Archie. Merely observation." He opened his eyes, sharp and clear. "Invite her here." I blinked. "To the brownstone?" "Yes. Inform her that we are gathering post-case statements and would appreciate her input. Watch how she reacts. Watch how she moves." I called Baxter, made the pitch. Melinda agreed, if reluctantly. She arrived the next afternoon. Wolfe didn't rise. I introduced them. "I understand," she said to Wolfe, "that you believe I may have mishandled something." "I believe," Wolfe said, "that a great deal depends on small details. Tell me about the delivery." She recited the facts again, verbatim. Same polished lines, same glib tone, but this time I watched. Her left hand kept brushing her coat pocket. A tic, or nervous habit. When she stood to leave, she turned too quickly, bumping the edge of the desk. Her bag shifted, fell open. A slip of paper fluttered to the carpet. I picked it up before she could. A receipt from Harvey Klein's warehouse. Signed Melinda Crane. Dated one day before the cheese was delivered to Baxter's. Wolfe raised his eyebrows. Would you care to explain? She stared at it, color draining from her face, then slowly sat down again, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. It was just once, she said. They paid me to receive a different wheel. I didn't know who they were. Bixby. She nodded. He said it was a promotional sample. Baxter would never know. I didn't think it mattered. Wolfe closed his eyes. No crime begins with thinking, he murmured. Only with deciding. She left quietly. I called Kramer again. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. Now, he said, we are done. I waited. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. By the next morning, the air in the brownstone had returned to something like normal, which is to say everyone was pretending the place hadn't recently hosted a high-stakes dairy sting. Wolfe had resumed his daily glower over the Gazette crossword. Fritz was muttering Latin names at his herbs in the kitchen, and I was flipping through the society pages for signs that our recent guests had recovered from their respective reckonings. Baxter, according to a brief item buried beneath a piece on heirloom apples, had stepped back temporarily from curating the Rhine Society's monthly tastings. I figured that was code for hiding in his apartment and re-evaluating every slice of cheese he'd ever praised. Winthrop, unsurprisingly, had been scrubbed from the roster. Lucinda, on the other hand, was already rumored to be launching a new transparent tasting collective with a catchy name, Truth and Rind. I admired the hustle, but Wolfe, for all his dramatic wrapping up, still hadn't fully exhaled. He'd been quieter than usual after Melinda Crane's departure. No pontifications, no drawn-out reflections on ethics and dairy fraud, which frankly was suspicious. You're still chewing, I said around noon, after Wolfe had declined both lunch and my third attempt at baiting him into conversation. I am not chewing, he said flatly. I am digesting. That's worse, I said. That means something's still stuck. He finally looked up from the crossword. Melinda Crane did not act alone. Or rather, she may have begun alone. But someone persuaded her to act. You will remember that she claimed she was paid in cash by Bixby. I remember. And yet Bixby had no known financial link to her. No record of a payment. And we now know that she signed for the cheese herself at Harvey Klein's warehouse. So why, Archie, would a man like Bixby, careful, circuitous, layered, allow his inside player to leave a name on a receipt? I frowned. Because he was arrogant? Or sloppy? Wolfe's brow lifted a fraction. A plausible excuse, but insufficient. Bixby was a merchant of shadows, a man who built his livelihood on not being seen. He would never permit a receipt unless he wanted the trail to lead there. And if he wanted that, I said slowly, then he was covering someone else. Exactly. I paced, thinking. Lucinda, I asked, could she have played both sides? Used the scam to eliminate Baxter and then staged her moral comeback for PR? No, Wolfe said. Lucinda is brash, but not subtle. She would never execute such an elaborate misdirection, and had she planned it, she would not have been the scapegoat. Then who? Wolfe tapped his fingers on the armrest of his chair. Soft, slow, deliberate. Someone with proximity. Someone who knew both Baxter and Melinda Crane well. Someone who had the motive to collapse Baxter's influence without seizing it directly. Someone overlooked. I stopped pacing. You think there's another society member involved? I do. He reached for the bell and rang once. Fritz entered, towel over one shoulder. Beer, Wolfe said, and Mr. Goodwin's notebook. 5 minutes later, we were reviewing the society roster again. 9 members present at the infamous tasting. 4 had been cleared. Winthrop and Bixby were out of circulation. Lucinda was newly absolved. Baxter was the victim. That left three: a venture capitalist named Thomas Verrill, a television food critic named Elise Morin, and a quiet archivist from the Culinary Institute named Owen Dempsey. Wolfe pointed. Him? Dempsey? Yes. I flipped through my notes. He barely spoke. Said he didn't even try the reblochon because he's allergic to cow's milk. Exactly, Wolfe said. I stared. You think not eating the cheese is suspicious? No, Archie. I think claiming not to eat the cheese is suspicious. Particularly when it was voted the most exquisite sample of the evening and he was one of only 9 tasters. He voted. Yes. I frowned. But if he didn't eat it, then he lied. Wolfe closed his eyes, the lines around them tightening. I suspect that Mr. Dempsey encouraged Miss Crane to switch the cheese. Perhaps even offered her protection, convinced her that Baxter would never notice, that it was only a minor substitution. Academic even. I whistled low. So he was the one pulling strings. More likely, whispering. A man who collects knowledge, who watches power without needing to wield it directly. Perfect for manipulation. I grabbed my coat. Want me to pay him a visit? No, Wolfe said. Invite him here. Tell him we're conducting a retrospective interview on the integrity of the tasting. He'll come. He might not talk. He will, Wolfe said. He will listen. That's what he does. And in listening he will try to control the narrative. That's where he will reveal himself. Dempsey arrived that evening in a corduroy jacket and a bow tie that made him look like a history teacher at a liberal arts college. He sat neatly, said little, and waited for us to begin. I'm glad you could join us, Wolfe said. This will not take long. I'm merely seeking clarification. Dempsey smiled. Of course. You abstained from the reblochon at the tasting, did you not? I did, Dempsey said. I'm mildly allergic to cow's milk. I usually restrict myself to sheep and goat cheeses. And yet, Wolfe said, you voted for it as the finest selection of the evening. Dempsey's smile twitched. Yes, I trust the group's opinion. I thought it best not to be contrary. That is generous, Wolfe said, but also inconsistent. You vote on cheeses you do not consume. I weigh in, based on aroma, texture. Wolfe cut him off. You lied, Mr. Dempsey. Dempsey blinked. I beg your pardon. You ate the cheese, and you knew it was not authentic. But you did not care, because the substitution benefited you. I don't know. You encouraged Melinda Crane to accept the switch. You used her loyalty to Baxter and her discomfort with confrontation. You gave her the illusion of harmlessness. You insulated Bixby and Winthrop by creating the paper trail. Dempsey was very still. Then softly. That's an imaginative theory. No, Wolfe said. It is an accurate one. He reached into a folder and handed me a small page. Archie. I read aloud. To OK Dempsey. Subject. Guest list confirmed. Should be fine. If Prescott complains, remind her, he won't actually notice the difference. Worst case, he gets stubborn, and she takes the fall. Winthrop will keep the praise flowing. Just make sure Bixby handles the switch discreetly. I looked up, recovered from Melinda's tablet. Courtesy of Saul, Dempsey's mask cracked. For one breathless second he looked ancient. Not old, exposed. Like a relic, dug up under bad light. It wasn't personal, he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. Prescott's gatekeeping was holding the group back. He made everything about legacy, not discovery. It was supposed to be subtle. Just one tasting. Just a reminder that his mouth wasn't the only one that mattered. You compromised trust, Wolfe said coldly. In service of self-importance, Dempsey rose slowly. And what of your trust, Mr. Wolfe? Built on intimidation, ritual, and your own mythology. We're all performers. You mistook taste for theater, Wolfe said. They are not the same. I called Kramer. Again. When the door closed behind Dempsey, and the echo of betrayal had left with him. Wolfe sat back, eyes shut. You were right, I said. Something was stuck. Wolfe didn't respond. Just reached for the glass of beer. I hadn't seen him pour. He raised it once, a silent toast to a war fought with whispers and wedges, and took a long, slow drink. It rained that night. Not a dramatic, crashing, cinematic rain, just a kind of steady, civilized drizzle that made the streets shine and the whole city smell faintly of asphalt and regret. Inside the brownstone, things were quieter than usual. The rain muffled cab horns and sirens. Fritz padded silently through the house, adjusting the thermostat like it mattered to anyone but the orchids, and Wolfe hadn't said a word in an hour. He was in his chair, of course. He hadn't moved except to glare at the fire, as if it had personally insulted his ancestry. I was in mine, flipping through a week-old copy of Gourmet Quarterly, mostly for the ad photography. My mind wasn't on food, it was on Owen Dempsey now sitting in a cell somewhere, no doubt still wrapped in that professor's calm, the kind of calm that only cracks when the gavel comes down. It had taken 3 arrests, 2 confessions, and a trail of forged invoices before Wolfe had declared himself satisfied. But tonight, for once, he didn't look satisfied. Not even smug. "You're still brooding," I said. "I am not brooding," he said without looking at me. "I am reflecting." "You sure? Because that beer's been sitting there untouched for almost 20 minutes and I've seen you put down a steak faster than that." He didn't respond. I waited. Then finally he said, "It was not a crime of hunger." "No," I said. "It was a crime of control." "Worse," Wolfe murmured, "a crime of presumption." I let that one hang. "The assumption," he continued, "that taste could be reshaped to suit convenience, that trust could be brokered, that reputations were levers to be pulled at will without consequence." "You're not usually this philosophical." "I am always philosophical," he snapped. "I merely reserve the condition for after the dishes have been cleared." I grinned. "Fritz will be thrilled to hear it." He leaned back and closed his eyes, temple pulsing just slightly. "You understand, Archie, that what Dempsey did was not simply manipulation. It was vandalism." He struck at the idea that something real still exists. "Real cheese. Real anything," Wolfe said. "Real standards. Real judgment. Real integrity." He hollowed the idea of discernment and used the shell to prop up mediocrity. "That is the worst kind of deceit, one that pretends to protect while it poisons." I set the magazine down. He could have walked away from all of it, you know. If he'd just let Baxter figure it out, if he hadn't doubled down with Melinda, or dragged in Winthrop, he might have gotten away clean. "No one gets away clean," Wolfe said, eyes still closed. "There is always residue. Lies leave it behind like smoke in a curtain. Sooner or later, someone pulls it aside." I stood up, crossed to the window. Rain trickled in thin, diagonal lines against the glass. Below, a cab turned the corner slowly, its headlights carving soft gold across the wet sidewalk. "You think Baxter will come back to the society?" "He will be asked," Wolfe said. "But I doubt he will return." "Not as before." I nodded. Too much was built on what he didn't question. "And now," Wolfe said, "he must question everything." I went to the sideboard, poured myself a brandy. Wolfe didn't join me. He just sat there, arms folded, brow tight. I couldn't help it. I had to poke the bear. "You really cared about this one?" "I care about all of them." "No, you don't," I said gently. "But you cared about this one." Wolfe's voice was quieter now. "Because it entered this house." I turned. He opened his eyes and looked at me. "You know how I feel about intrusion, Archie. About disorder. But this was an infection. It wore refinement, like a mask. It spoke the right words. It praised the right textures, and underneath it was rot. That offends me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Dempsey believed he could shape perception, that he could decide what was real, that no one would notice, and he very nearly succeeded. "But he didn't," I said. "No," Wolfe admitted. "Because one man tasted the difference and couldn't let it go." "Precisely." I sipped the brandy, thinking, "I'll say this," I added after a pause. This wasn't just about cheese. It was about confidence, belief, and how easy it is to make people question both. That, Wolfe said, is the modern condition. Still, I said, I liked it better when our cases had bodies and alibis. This one made me suspicious of everything in the fridge. Wolfe gave a faint grunt that might have been a chuckle, then finally reached for his beer. He drank, long and slow, and set the glass down with the kind of care you'd reserve for a rare book or a temperamental egg. I will say one thing, he murmured. Brace myself? No, he said. Just listen. I waited. In this house, Wolfe said, truth is not subjective, nor is it negotiable. It must be tasted, tested, and held to account. If we abandon that, we may as well serve pasteurized Velveeta and call it Camembert. I gave a salute with the brandy glass. That'll be the inscription on your statue someday. Wolfe lifted his beer. Let us hope, he said. No one counterfeits that. And with that, the house finally exhaled. Dinner followed, simple and perfect. Roast guinea fowl with sage butter, slow-cooked leeks, a tart tatin that would have made a poet weep. Wolfe said little, but the way he chewed, the way he paused to savor, he was restoring order the only way he knew how. Later, I wrote the final case report, tidied my notes, and left the office lights dim. The fire was down to coals. The rain had stopped. As I turned in for the night, I heard Wolfe call softly from the office, Archie. I leaned back through the doorway. Yes, tomorrow, he said. We returned to routine. I grinned. No more cheese conspiracies. He looked away, toward the bookshelf. No more interruptions. And with that, the final line was spoken, the curtain drawn, order restored. Until the next knock at the door. The next morning, the sun came back like it had something to prove. The streets outside the brownstone were shining with puddles, the sky was a defiant blue, and the city looked like it had been scrubbed overnight, not cleaned exactly, but dried off and turned over like a mattress in spring. Inside, the brownstone was already humming with the rhythms of recovery. Fritz was back in command of his kitchen, decanting a bottle of raspberry vinegar with the reverence of a man restoring sacred order. Wolfe was in his chair, already 1.5 beers into the morning, and buried in a monograph on rare legume cultivars from Tunisia. And I, freshly caffeinated and mildly bored, was thumbing through our appointment book. You've got nothing on the schedule until Thursday, I called to him. Unless you want to count that guy from Yonkers who keeps writing letters about his haunted bread. I do not, Wolfe said without looking up. Then you're free to wallow in legumes. Do not mock legumes, Archie. Wouldn't dream of it. But if you'd like something to interrupt your peaceful descent into pea-based philosophy, there's a letter from Prescott Baxter. That got a grunt. I opened the envelope. Baxter's handwriting was precise and slanted, like it expected to be judged by a panel. Mr. Wolfe, I will be leaving the city for a time. I need distance from tastings, from circles of curation, from my own certainty. You uncovered more than a deception. You uncovered a blind spot I had cultivated out of pride. I am grateful, though I may not have seemed it. Enclosed, you will find a small token. It is not a fee. It is an acknowledgement of what was preserved. Pickett Baxter. Inside was a check, a generous one. The kind that made even my cynicism blink twice. Wolfe looked at the paper when I handed it to him, sniffed, and tucked it into the middle drawer of his desk, without comment. Not going to cash it? I asked. I might. Or I might frame it and hang it in the kitchen, he said dryly. As a reminder. Of what? He looked up. That even the most educated palates are prone to flattery, and that salvation occasionally arrives in the form of stubbornness. I made a note in the ledger anyway. If he ever did decide to cash it, I wanted the record clean. Around noon, Saul Panza stopped by, wearing his usual wrinkled suit, and that look of quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing more than most and saying less than necessary. Wolfe allowed him in, just this once, without requiring an appointment. Thought you'd like to see this, Saul said, handing over a folded article from the Times. Cheese scandal spreads to luxury import market. Brokers indicted for product misrepresentation. Below the headline was a column outlining the legal fallout of the Dempsey-Bixby-Winthrop triangle. Multiple indictments, suspended licenses, import audits. There was even a paragraph about new legislation being floated by a state senator who'd once had a run-in with mislabeled goat's milk at a fundraiser. Wolfe read the piece in silence, then handed it back to Saul. It was inevitable, he said. Saul nodded. Word is, the Culinary Institute's reviewing Dempsey's certifications, quietly. He's not going to lecture again anytime soon. And Melinda Crane cooperated fully. Probably spared herself prison. Lost her job, though. I glanced at Wolfe. That satisfy your appetite for justice? It sates it, Wolfe said. But satisfaction implies pleasure. There was none. After Saul left, Wolfe returned to his book. But something in his posture had softened slightly, like an internal tension had been unknotted. The brownstone was intact again. The last of the false flavors had been scrubbed away. We had duck confit for dinner, with a side of watercress and horseradish cream. Wolfe said nothing during the meal, but I could tell he approved. He didn't need to say it. When Nero Wolfe is content, the silence tastes better. After dinner we sat in the office, the fire flickering low. I pulled out the case file and started organizing notes, but Wolfe surprised me by speaking first. Do you recall, he said, what Dempsey said when confronted? He said it wasn't personal, that Baxter was in the way, that he just wanted to shift influence. Indeed, Wolfe said. But he was wrong. How so? It was deeply personal. He wanted to shape what others believed. That is the most personal ambition there is. I paused. You think he started with ideology? I think he started with resentment, Wolfe said. The ideology came later once he found a way to justify betrayal as progress. Like all the best villains. Wolfe gave me a sharp look. Dempsey is not a villain. He is a man, and that is more dangerous. I sat back, watching the fire. So what did we learn? That sophistication, Wolfe said, is not a shield. And that taste, however refined, is no substitute for honesty. He paused, then added, and that even a wheel of cheese can be a weapon. I laughed. You're going to put that on a plaque? No, Wolfe said, but I expect you will. Later that night, I walked the house. The rooms were quiet. The air had returned to its usual mix of old wood, slow-cooked aromatics, and Fritz's militant cleanliness. The brownstone was more than just walls and bookshelves. It was Wolfe's cathedral, and mine, too, in its way. I returned to the office and looked around. Wolfe was asleep in his chair, chin dipped, hands resting neatly on his belly. The empty beer glass on the side table was the only evidence of life. I didn't wake him. I just turned out the light and let the house rest. The city could go on playing its games, counterfeit flavors, hollow praise, twisted reputations. But here, behind these walls, things were as they ought to be. Measured, precise, real. And tomorrow, God help us, someone else would knock. The knock came at 9:03 the next morning. I was mid-toast and full of suspicion. We weren't expecting anyone. Wolfe had declared the day unsullied on account of his scheduled reading of the Gastronomic Lexicon, Volume 4, and Fritz had planned a menu to match light, unhurried, citrus-heavy. That knock was either a delivery with bad timing, or a person with worse. I set down my toast and looked at Wolfe. He didn't glance up from the page. He simply said, "You know where the door is?" "Yes, sir," I muttered, and went. She was young, mid-20s, sharp-featured, and dressed like she'd borrowed style tips from every gallery in Soho. A canvas tote bag hung off one shoulder, overstuffed with folders, and her expression was crisp with purpose. That expression always spells trouble. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked. "Still in place," I said. "And still allergic to interruptions." "You're Simone Frey," she said. "I'm a graduate student at Columbia. Food anthropology. I was told you handled the Baxter incident." I opened the door wider, but didn't invite her in. Handled. Yes, proudly. Recovered. Barely. I'd like to speak with Mr. Wolfe, she said, eyes narrowing. I have reason to believe the incident was part of something larger. There it was. That phrase. Something larger. The bait that always brings Wolfe off his mountaintop. I gave her a long look, then nodded her inside. When we entered the office, Wolfe marked his page and looked up slowly. Miss Frey, I said, says she has news of the apocalypse, or possibly more cheese fraud. Either way, I thought you'd want to say. Wolfe didn't scowl, which for him was equivalent to leaping to his feet in delight. Miss Frey, he said, state your business. She settled into the client chair, legs crossed, eyes level. I've been researching the manipulation of taste authority in elite markets. Baxter's case, the fake reblochon, the society scandal. It wasn't an outlier. It was a prototype. Wolfe said nothing, but the twitch of his left eyebrow suggested engagement. Simone opened her tote bag and removed a folder. I've tracked similar cases, she continued, involving rare single-origin spices, aged vinegars, even wildflower honeys. All endorsed by select reviewers, then exposed as substitutes after market value skyrocketed. Go on, Wolfe said. 3 names recur on the fringe of each case. Quietly. No fingerprints, no public link. But the same pattern. A small circle of influencers builds narrative. A switch is made in distribution. One respected palate is compromised, either through deception or encouragement. I leaned in. Encouragement, meaning bribery, or something softer, career pressure, visibility, access. But the goal is the same. Make someone believe in the substitute, and the rest of the market will follow. Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest. Who are the 3? Simone hesitated, then slid a document across the desk. Wolfe ignored it. I picked it up. The names were new. No Bixby, no Dempsey, but the pattern was the same. Let me guess, I said. They all work behind the scenes. Simone nodded. Brand consultants, import liaisons. They never appear on labels, but they shape reputations. I looked at Wolfe. Sound familiar? He grunted. It's not new, but it is evolving. Simone leaned forward. I believe the Baxter case was a test, a way to gauge resistance. They wanted to see how deeply they could embed a fraud before someone noticed. And they noticed, I said. Us. Wolfe finally looked at Simone directly. Why bring this to me? Because no one else believes it matters, she said. They think it's too subtle to prosecute, too abstract to care. But taste is trust. And trust, once breached, infects everything. That got Wolfe. His expression changed just slightly. A look of approval, or perhaps recognition. You are not wrong, he said. But be careful. The deeper the flavor, the better it hides the rot. Simone stood. Then help me find it. Wolfe considered. Then nodded once. Leave your notes. Mr. Goodwin will review them. If they meet the standard, we will consider an inquiry. She hesitated. And if they don't, then I will drink beer and forget your name, he said. She smiled faintly. Fair enough. I walked her out and watched her disappear into the swirl of morning traffic. When I returned, Wolfe was already halfway through the folder. Thought we were done with cheese conspiracies, I said. This is not cheese, Wolfe murmured. This is empire. He looked up. We must tread carefully. You're really going to take it? I am considering it. I laughed. You've already taken it. He didn't deny it. Instead, he handed me the folder and reached for the bell to summon Fritz. Lunch must be adjusted, he said. For who? For me, Wolfe replied. There is no appetite without caution. And just like that, the taste of peace vanished again, replaced by the first course of something darker, more complex. We weren't done after all. Not with flavor, not with fraud, not with the empire of the palate. The door had opened, and the next case had already taken a seat. The storm that had cracked open with Simone Frey's visit didn't erupt immediately. It simmered. Wolfe took a full 48 hours to read, annotate, and digest the materials she'd left. And in that time, the brownstone held its breath. Fritz tread more quietly in the kitchen. I took fewer liberties with sarcasm. Even the orchids seemed to wilt slightly in the waiting. By the morning of the third day, Wolfe made a decision. He didn't say, "I've made a decision, of course." That would have required unnecessary clarity. Instead, he pushed aside his copy of Escoffier's memoirs and said, "Archie, call Miss Frey. Inform her I will speak with her again. But this time, under condition." What condition? That she bring the man named Rylan Creel with her. That name had stuck out from her research like a crack in a glass pane. Rylan Creel, quiet consultant, reputation strategist, former sommelier, turned supply chain advisor to half the boutique distributors on the East Coast. His name never appeared in a headline, but it was behind all of them, a flavor shaper. The ghost in the grocery aisle. "He won't come willingly," I said. "He will," Wolfe replied, "because Miss Frey will offer him exactly what he cannot resist. The chance to explain himself to someone who might understand." He was right. The next evening, Creel walked into the brownstone like a man arriving at a wine tasting he secretly owned. Mid-40s, lean, immaculately dressed, with a mouth made for dismissing lesser opinions. He shook my hand like it was an obligation and gave Wolfe a slow, appraising nod. "Mr. Wolfe?" he said. "I've heard of you." "I'm aware," Wolfe said, unmoving. "Please sit." Simone followed behind, tense but composed. She had the look of someone who knew the fuse was lit and couldn't do anything but wait for the pop. Wolfe did not offer drinks. That, I noted, was intentional. "Mr. Creel," Wolfe said, "your name appears with unusual frequency in matters of mistaken origin." Creel smiled faintly. "That depends on how you define mistake. A product labeled as Croatian truffle that originated in a New Jersey mushroom farm," Wolfe said. "A balsamic vinegar, allegedly aged 12 years, that was bottled in Modesto 2 months ago. A reblochon substitute so well placed it nearly unseated a century of French certification." Creel spread his hands. "Are you accusing me of fraud?" "I am accusing you of design," Wolfe said calmly. "You curate doubt. You engineer flexibility. And when the cracks appear, you call it disruption." Creel sat back. "Taste is subjective, Mr. Wolfe." "No," Wolfe said, his voice now sharpened. "Preference is subjective. Taste is empirical. It has rules. Chemistry, geography, integrity. You have convinced an entire echelon that excellence is whatever they are told it is. That is not subjectivity. That is usurpation." Simone stepped in. We traced the substitutions back through at least 5 brokers, all linked by shell companies, brand refreshers, or silent advisory contracts. All of them traced back to Creel's firm. Creel's expression never changed. "And what, precisely, is the crime?" "No crime yet," Wolfe murmured. "Only rot, but rot spreads. And when it reaches the center of the fruit, the collapse is swift." He opened a folder, his own, this time, and removed a printed invoice. "This," he said, "is an order placed under your name. A shipment of cheeses, oils, and honey, bound for a high-profile tasting event in Boston next month. All items are labeled premium. All are counterfeit." Creel blinked once. "You've been watching me." "No," Wolfe said. "We've been listening." Creel's voice dropped. "I am simply responding to the market, Mr. Wolfe. People want prestige, but they do not want to pay for it. I make it available, elegantly. And in doing so," Wolfe replied, "you make excellence indistinguishable from pretense. You flatten nuance. You destroy truth." There was a long silence. Creel stood. "You cannot stop it," he said. "The world is shifting. Then let it shift elsewhere," Wolfe said. Creel looked at Simone. "You leaked this to him. You signed your own irrelevance." "No," she said. I reclaimed it. Creel left without another word. Wolfe did not ask me to call the police. He didn't need to. The documents had already been sent by Saul earlier that day to 3 regulators, 2 journalists and 1 ambitious assistant DA with an appetite for food fraud cases. By the time Creel left our doorstep, his carefully managed empire was already beginning to curdle. Later, in the office, Wolfe let his chair absorb him. I poured myself a drink. Simone sat quietly, notebook in her lap, watching him. "You know," she said, "you could have exposed him years ago." "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But until now, no one was watching." She rose, offered her hand. Wolfe looked at it, nodded, and let her leave unshaken. That, from him, was approval. After she left, I finally spoke. "You think that's it?" "For now," Wolfe said. "You didn't even ask for a fee." "I did not. I have been paid." "How?" He gestured at the fire. "In restoration." He closed his eyes. "Taste," he said, "is an act of faith. When that faith is violated, something fundamental erodes. Tonight, we preserved it. I raised my glass. To the truth, however it smells." He raised his beer. "As long as it smells like what it claims." The fire burned lower. Outside, the city whispered on. And inside the brownstone, Nero Wolfe sat still in his chair, guardian of facts, tyrant of taste, and the last line of defense against a world that kept trying to rewrite what was real. The case was over, but the flavor of justice remained. And Wolfe, I could tell, would savor it.